It is great to see everybody here today on this cold but beautiful Sunday morning. I told the Bible class this morning that I'm not ready. I wasn't ready for this sudden shift in the weather. It's been so cold, so fast, but still it is beautiful. There's this creation that God has made, that He has given us, and we're thankful for that. Today is this weekend has been about veterans, right? Veterans Day was the 11th, and now on the 13th, we have a Veterans Day dinner that Stephen Westa and others have helped set up, and we're thankful for that. And we thank everybody here who was a veteran, is a veteran. I'm not going to name names because I know for a fact that I will forget somebody, and I don't want to do that. And so you know who you are, and we thank you so very much. It's without you, we would not have the freedoms that we have. And God working through you, working through different things has allowed us to have those freedoms. And while I truly hate, I'll say hate, it's a good word, war, and while I truly wish that we didn't have it, it is a fact of life. There are physical wars going on everywhere. The war in Ukraine right now, the war in the Middle East that has been going on for literally thousands and thousands of years over the same few things. The wars that have plagued this world for as long as we have been here. It is a human thing that we do because we are not perfect, because we covet what others have, and because we simply don't know how to act sometimes. And just like there is physical warfare going on in the world today, there is also spiritual warfare. And if you remember back at our Farley family retreat that we had back in a few months ago, we talked about Ephesians chapter 6, about putting on the whole armor of God to stand against the schemes of the devil, because we are facing a spiritual enemy that knows how to make war against us. And one of his best and favorite ways to make spiritual warfare against us comes in the smallest of packages. In James chapter 3, Jacob read for us a little bit of what we are going to be talking about today. But truly, whoever came up with the little phrase, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never harm me," was lying. They were not telling the truth, because it is the worst saying ever. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never harm me. Well, let me ask you this. How many times have we been hurt by what somebody has said? Let me ask you this. How many times have we hurt somebody by something we've said? How many times in our lives have we said something and then just like next second later we were like, "Oh, I wish I didn't say anything. I wish I didn't say that. I wish I said something different," because we know for a fact that whatever we said or whatever we did or whatever offended somebody else, hurt somebody else. Truly, the tongue, words, is one of the devil's favorite things to use against us in the spiritual warfare that we find ourselves in each and every single day. Growing up, one of the worst things that would happen to me is when I would get in trouble. It wasn't the spanking, which that hurt, but it was the words, "I'm disappointed in you." Words matter. Words hurt. And today, sort of what I want to talk about is the fact that we, as a culture, as a people, whatever you want to call it, today we live in a world of extremes. We live in a world of extremes. You have the extreme liberal side and it's cancel culture. And if you don't know what cancel culture is, it's where, if something offends enough people, no matter what it is, it could be the truth and it offend enough people. But if it offends enough people and if enough people get behind it, it's canceled or it's done away with, right? A few things have happened. If you remember, and I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but Donald Trump is a great example of it. He was kicked off of Twitter for his tweets. That is an example of cancel culture. And not only that, but also the truth has been canceled. In many cases, if you go on to Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever news outlet that you use, there are certain things, certain phrases that you cannot say anymore, even if it is the truth. And so you have that extreme, but you also have the other extreme, extreme conservatism. And what I mean by extreme conservatism is that some people believe that it's okay to say whatever they want. Some people believe that it's okay to say whatever they want, even if they know that it's going to offend somebody. And this might not be a great thing for me to say in Alabama, but wouldn't it be great if we could just somehow meet in the middle, where we aren't canceling everything that might be truth, but we also don't say things with the express desire to offend somebody, to hurt somebody. Because truly, the tongue is a world of iniquity, as James puts it. And I believe that if we were somewhere closer in the middle, that we would not only be better, but we would also be more biblical as a people. Because in James chapter 3, starting in verse 1, if you'll turn with me there, that's where we're going to be for the first little bit of today's lesson. But in James chapter 3, starting in verse 1, we read, James, a bondservant, chapter 3, let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such we will incur a stricter judgment. So those of us who are teachers, and truly, we are all teachers, we will incur a stricter judgment because we are saying things that need to be said. Because we ought to be saying the truth, and we ought not to be putting people down, to be degrading people, to be whatever else it may be. We are saying things to people that has the want and the desire to bring them closer to God. In verse 2, James goes on to say, for we stumble in many ways, right? Those of us who are teachers, we will be incur a stricter judgment because we stumble in many ways. That's just what's going to happen. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body as well. What we say. What we say matters. Right away, James tells us that if we were able to control the things that came out of our mouths, we would be perfect. Right away, James tells us that if we were able to control this little muscle in our mouths, if we were able to control the filter that we should have, then we would be absolutely perfect. But unfortunately, we are not perfect. And we sometimes fail to control what comes out of our mouths. He goes on to say in verses 3 through 5 that if we put the bits in the horse's mouth so that they will obey us, we direct their entire bodies as well. Look at the ships also, though they are so great and driven by strong winds, are still directed by a small rudder wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. So James gives us two examples. He gives us the examples of a horse and a ship. And if you've never been next to a horse, and I'm sure most of us here have, if you haven't, go over to a farm right down in Lacey Springs. Nobody's there. It'll be okay. That's Kristen Burrell's farm. They got a bunch of horses, and horses are big. Horses are powerful animals, and yet James tells us, and as we know, if you put a bit in their mouths, they're going to go wherever you tell them to. The same thing with a ship. A small rudder makes a great big cruise ship nowadays go wherever the pilot wants. James tells us that the tongue, though it is small, has the ability to control us. Now, one of the things that I always remember hearing from the pulpit growing up is that if we take trash in, trash is going to come out. And so often we find ourselves letting trash in. What we listen to, what we read, what we look at, whatever it is. We take that in, and we can't expect good things to come out if we take it in trash. And so often it comes out through the tongue, through what we say, through how we interact with others. But from verses 1 to 5 of James chapter 3, so far there hasn't been anything too earth-shattering. James is sort of, he's told us that the tongue is able to control us, but we know that. We understand this. And so it hasn't been anything too earth-shattering, but then we get to verse 6, and everything sort of starts falling apart. In verse 6 of chapter 3, we read, in verse 5, let's go back up to verse 5. It says that, so also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts great things. See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. In verse 6 we read that James says that the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body and sets on fire the course of our life, and is set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptiles and creatures of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by the human race, but no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. Verses 1 through 5 were sort of okay. But once we got past verse 6, James really starts telling us what the tongue is and what the tongue could be if we allow ourselves to take in the trash. If we allow ourselves to take in the world. If we allow ourselves to take in hell. James tells us that the tongue is set on fire by hell, that it is full of deadly poison, and that it stains or it defiles the whole body. And I want us to pay very close attention to verses 7 and 8. I want to read it again just momentarily. It says, For every species of beast and bird, of reptiles and creatures of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by the human race, but no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Now I want us to look at something back all the way in Job. In Job chapter 41, we find not a direct reference. I don't want you to think that James is directly referencing Job when he writes this. However, it is important to note that the same language is used here. In Job chapter 41, we read about a creature called the Leviathan. And if we read the whole chapter, and you have to sort of read the whole chapter to get the full picture of what the Leviathan is. But basically, it's something out of a nightmare. And a lot of people, biblical scholars and other people like that have sort of tried to make this into an alligator or a crocodile or a hippo or something like that, or a whale. I don't buy into it. I don't buy into that. The language here describes something to me that is, a Godzilla-esque creature, right? And the same language that is used about the Leviathan, that it is unable to be tamed, that it is, it pouring fire out of its body, that it is a world of iniquity. The same sort of language used in Job chapter 41 about a huge sea monster is used in James chapter 3 describing our tongue. Now again, it's not a direct quotation and it's not a direct quote. But the same language is used in both accounts. And I just think that it's incredibly interesting that James would choose to use these words. That James would choose to describe the tongue as something out of a nightmare. We go to verse 9. Verse 9 of James chapter 3 tells us that with our tongue, we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come both blessings and cursings. My brethren, these sayings ought not to be this way. We can use our tongue for good. We can. That is what we do. We are Christians. We are a shining light in the world, as Matthew chapter 5 puts it. We are letting our light shine so that others may see our good works and glorify God. We are good examples to the people in our workplaces. We praise God with our mouths. We just got done singing praises to God, and it was beautiful. We can do great things with our words, but we can also use it for evil. And oftentimes, that's what the world does. And unfortunately, Christians sometimes do it as well. And I truly believe, I'll just give you a little bit of Josh's mind here. I truly believe that this is one of the biggest areas where we as Christians mess up. I truly believe it. This is one of the biggest things that we mess up. And I'm not talking about cursing. I'm not talking about bullying. I'm not talking about harassing people with our words. I'm not talking about any of that. If you're doing that, please don't do that. Please stop that. We shouldn't be cursing or harassing people or bullying people. We shouldn't make fun of people. But I'm not necessarily talking about that for us. I'm talking more of how we interact with non-Christians and with other Christians. What are our interactions with people? I read a bulletin article back home a long time ago, and it made such an impact on me that I've never forgotten it. And it was a story about a young lady who came in to a worship service one day. She went to class, she stayed for the service, and she wasn't in church clothes, right? She wasn't wearing church clothes, she wasn't wearing a dress, and I'm not saying that she was scantily dressed. The article didn't say that she was scantily dressed, but she wasn't exactly wearing what we would consider to be church clothes. And at the end of the service, one of the members came up to her and told her that, next time you come, don't come unless you have good clothes on. And the young lady looked at the member and said, well, I probably won't ever be back. And I'm not saying that happens here. And that's probably a really extreme example. But that does happen. And it happens in more ways than just that. Now, I'm not saying that tonight, please don't come here in your PJs. But maybe that illustration doesn't speak to some of us. But there are plenty more examples that we can give. Gossip, passive aggressiveness, bickering, arguing, self-righteousness, segregation. Some more extreme examples may be saying things even though it offends others. It may be enjoying ourselves at others' expense, now not allowing other people's perspectives to be known. These are just some of the many ways that we mess up in our day-to-day lives. And the thing that gets me is that sometimes, myself included, sometimes we do these things. We gossip. We say things to other people that hurt them. We do all these different things, and then we go right back on Sunday morning and we worship God. We're blessed. We're blessed to be at a congregation like this. We're blessed to be at a congregation like Farley. But we're not perfect. And I know that we're not perfect because I'm up here. Because I do some of these things. And so, how do we fix it? Because like I said, I truly believe that this is one of the areas in Christianity where we messed up. And so how do we fix it? Well, folks, today we're talking about how we need to keep our tongue in check. That's what we're talking about today. But our tongue, keeping that in check, that comes with our attitude, right? If we go to Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 11, we all know this story. It's the parable of the prodigal son. And I'm not going to read it all to you because we all know it. But in Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 11, we find a young man who wanted his father's inheritance, and he got it. He spent it on riotous living. He gambled it all away on worldly things, and then after a long, long time of eating with the pigs, he finally came to the realization that his father's house was a better place. And so he went back to his father. Well, we all know that story. But today I want to focus on a little bit different perspective. I want us to go to the very last part of this story. And it's in verses 25 to 32. And this is the perspective of the older brother, right? And it says, "Now his older son, the man's older son, was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And he said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has received him back safe and sound.'" And so that's great, right? I hope that all of us, if our younger brother or older brother, whatever, came back after a long time of living a terrible life, that I hope that we would all be absolutely elated. But that's not what we find here. In verse 28, we read that he became angry and was not willing to go in. And his father came out and began pleading with him. But he answered and said to his father, "Look, for many years I have been serving you. Now I have never neglected a command of yours, and yet you have never given me a young goat, so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you've killed the fatted calf for him." And he said to him, "Son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead, and has begun to live, and was lost, and has been found." I want to look at the perspective, at the attitude of the older brother. Instead of rejoicing that his younger brother was home, instead of rejoicing that his younger brother had finally come to his senses, he was petty. He was focused on all of the bad stuff instead of what was good. He thought himself to be better than his younger brother because he had stayed, right? He had stayed. He thought that he was better, but he became worse. He was self-righteous because of his loyalty to his father, but he ended up being reprimanded by the same man who he had stayed with. And sometimes the church can be the same way. Instead of rejoicing that people have come inside the doors, we find whatever's wrong. We focus on how people are lost instead of how we can help them become saved. We think that we're better, but we're not. These things become reflected in our attitudes. And when they become reflected in our attitudes, they come out in how we talk to other people. And sometimes we forget about Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. Turn there with me, if you will. In Matthew chapter 7, starting in verse 1, a very well-known passage. A passage, to be honest, is often taken well out of context, but today we're going to look at it within its context. Matthew chapter 7, starting in verse 1, we read, "Do not judge, so that you will not be judged." Okay? Now this is a very well-known verse. A lot of people try to use it to say that we ought not to judge at all, but that's not what it's saying. Because in verse 2 it says, For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure it will be measured to you. And so in verse 3 it goes on to say that, why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own? Jesus goes on to say, you hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Now truly, this passage is not saying that we should not judge. You know, we can judge. No, we are not the judge, but we can judge people by their fruits. Marshall Keeble used to say that we are fruit inspectors. We can see the fruit that people bear, and we can know if they're living the right life or not. And then, out of love, we can tell them how to live their life better. But what I want us to notice here is that sometimes that log that Jesus talks about in our eye, sometimes it comes from us believing we don't have one at all. No, in the same way as other people have it. Sometimes that log in our eye is that we expect others to conform to our values, even though they don't yet believe in them. No, I cannot tell you, and maybe it's because I'm on a lot of preacher groups on Facebook and whatnot and everything else. I don't know. But I cannot tell you the amount of times I have read a story, an account, or whatever else it was, that Christians wanted others to conform to our beliefs before we ever taught them what those beliefs are. That Christians expected people to act the way that we act, even though those people didn't know that that's the way we should act. And truly, I've said it before, but I will say it as many times as I need. But we cannot expect people in the world to have the same values as us. We can't expect it. We can't expect them to have the same values. We can't expect them to have the same morals or the belief system that we have, because they don't yet understand why they ought to have it. They don't know why Jesus is the better way. They don't know why the writings in the Bible are the foundation for a good Christian life that will lead to a home in heaven. They don't understand why. We have Jesus as our standard, but they don't. And so many people, in the history of the church, have been turned off from the church because of this. Because we expect them to walk like us and talk like us and act like us from the start. And when they don't, the church ostracizes them. The church is the most beautiful thing in this world. The church leads us to heaven. The church is where we ought to be. We ought to be the church. But the church is not without flaws because it's made up of us. It's made up of people. And this problem that the church has got to stop. And I am blessed to be here with a church congregation like Farley. But this problem spans in every congregation. And I have about 4 things, 4 ways that we ought to live. 4 things to help us fix it. But I'm about out of time. And so if you want to know what those 4 things are, and I know you all do, be back here tonight at 5 o'clock. I know you love it when I do this to you. But this is important. It truly is. And I say it with all the love that I have in my heart, that it's a problem. And if it's not a problem for you, then these things can help us help others who have this problem. Now, if it's not a huge problem here, but it could be a huge problem elsewhere. And we all need a little bit of help every now and then. And so, today, this morning, if you need anything, this morning, if you need prayers, if you need a change of attitude, if you need a change of heart, whatever it may be, come forward. If you are ready to be baptized, you've never done that, you've never put on Christ in baptism, do that today. Now, I know that it is scary to come up here. I know that it's scary to admit sometimes that we're wrong. I know sometimes it's scary to admit that we need help. But like I said before, the church is the most beautiful thing in this world. Because the church is a community of people brought together by the blood of Christ that are trying to get to heaven. There's nothing more beautiful than that. There's nothing more beautiful than that community that we have with each other. To bear each other's burdens, to carry each other's loads, and to help each other receive a home in heaven with Christ. And so today, if you have any need whatsoever, whether it's baptism or if it's prayers for a return to Christ, I pray that you'll come now as we stand and as we sing.